let's make a level of detail expression using the include method. So include, if you recall, is the method that we use when we want to say, even if the level of detail of the view is quite coarse, you must include the following level of detail when you are performing this calculation. So it's a way of forcing the calculation to happen at a finer level of detail or level of detail than the view currently has. So how do we actually do this? Well, let's set up a situation first. Let's do country region for rows and year for rows. And then I'm going to look at two things. I'm going to look at population total first. And notice that this makes a graph, which is kind of a pain in the butt. So if you just go down here and change this to discrete, it shows the number, which is really nice. And then let's do population urban. And the same thing is true. We need to change this thing to discrete. Now notice that population urban here is a decimal. This is a percentage. And so imagine that we wanted to, and this is very common in data analytics, we're given the data set in percentage form, a population and a percentage, but we want the total population. So imagine I wanted to calculate, for instance, like the total urban population of Asia. And I want to know, is that number changing over time? Is it growing over time? Is it shrinking over time? And the total urban population of Asia is equal to, for every country in Asia, the population times the percentage urban population. Now the problem is I have to be really careful to do that correctly, because if I just look at the total population and the total percentage, that doesn't really make sense. If I look at the average population times the average percentage, that also doesn't make sense, because it will start taking into account big countries like China and the same way as small countries like Laos. And if you're looking at these averages, like if we average too early, these countries are counted the same, when in fact they should be counted differently. Like we should have the entire population over here, or for each country we should have its population times its percentage, and then we should sum up those numbers, not the other way around. So let's make our calculated field. So we'll say calculated field, and we'll say, call this thing urban, we'll say total urban population. And this thing is going to be, we want to include, so remember the level of detail expressions occur inside curly brackets. We're going to say country region, and we can actually specify two here. So for every country region, for every year, we're going to say the average of population total, oh sorry, population urban, my bad, times average population total. Great. Okay, so if I go through here, I say okay, and I drag this up here, and I make it discrete. If I were to go through and do this carefully, and I took this 20.5 million and multiplied by 21%, I would get this 4.3 million. Now, that's not super interesting, because the level of detail of the view is already at the country year level of detail. The power of this starts to make itself clear when I do something like take region, well, I'll take years for my columns, and then my population urban total for my rows, and then I'll break down by region. So in this case, like I know that this computation has been done correctly, because I've specified in my total urban population the correct level of detail expression that goes through and properly accounts for each country. So let me just remind ourselves what's going on here. For each country and year, I go through and I find the urban population percentage that year and the population total that year. I multiply those two things together, and I do that for every single country, and every single country year. And then, that's regardless of what level of detail the view is happening at. So here, there's no country in here. There's no country in this visualization's level of detail. But the computation of this variable has happened at the country level of detail. So I've gone through for Asia, for instance, and I've looked at China separately than Japan, separately than Vietnam, separately than Laos, separately than Cambodia, and I'm looking at their total urban population, each one of them individually, and then I'm summing it up. So I calculate the total urban population for every single country, and then I sum. And the reason that's so important is if I summed first or something, or averaged first, I might be treating China, a giant population of 1 billion people, the same as Laos, which has a population in maybe in the tens or hundreds of millions of people. So these are vastly different population bases, and yet I would be treating them the same if I wasn't very careful to treat each country separately from the get-go. So again, like these level of detail expressions, I sometimes write them, to be honest, just to make sure that I'm 100% confident that the computation is happening correctly everywhere. So even if I may not need it, sometimes I write the level of detail expression just to be completely sure that it's working the way I want it to. And we'll practice this obviously a ton as we go along. But the important part is we can manually specify where these computations are happening and how detailed they are.